One story, the temporary sector. I had heard rumors about the forest for years. Everyone in town knew about the temporary sector, an area deep in the woods that seemed to shift, disappear, and reappear. It was called temporary because nothing in it stayed the same. Trails would vanish, landmarks would move, and the sense of time would get distorted. Naturally, I was drawn to it. My name's Caleb, and I grew up in Dayton, a small town in Ohio. With not much to do around here, the forest was my escape. I'd been hiking its trails since I was a kid, but this time I wanted something more. I wanted to find the temporary sector. I set out alone one early afternoon, heading to a part of the woods that locals avoided. The air felt heavier the deeper I went, as if the forest was watching. After an hour of walking, I noticed a path that wasn't on any map. It seemed to twist between the trees, drawing me in. As I stepped into the sector, the temperature dropped. It wasn't cold enough for winter, but it felt like I'd walked into a different season. The trees loomed over me, their branches twisting unnaturally, as if they were trying to communicate. A faint hum filled the air, growing louder the deeper I ventured. Suddenly, I lost my footing and tumbled down a hill into a small clearing. When I stood up, the forest was gone. I was standing in the middle of a wide field that stretched as far as I could see. The sun was setting on the horizon, though it had been midday when I started. Confused, I turned around, but the path I fell from was gone. There was no hill, no trees, just an empty plain. A strange feeling crept over me, like I was being watched. I felt the ground beneath me shift as if it were alive. Then I heard footsteps, soft but deliberate, approaching from behind. I spun around, but there was nothing. My heart pounded in my chest as the footsteps grew louder and closer. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. Silence. The wind whistled through the field, but no answer. Just as I was about to turn and run, a figure appeared on the horizon. It was too far to make out, but it was moving toward me. Slowly. Methodically. My legs froze in place. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't listen. The figure drew closer, and I could see its face. It was me. Or at least it looked like me. The same clothes, the same face, the same expression. Only its eyes were different. Dark, hollow, like they'd seen something no human should see. I turned and sprinted, but the ground shifted beneath my feet. No matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape. Every time I glanced back, the figure was closer. Out of breath and desperate, I stumbled to my knees. The figure stood in front of me now, staring down with those empty eyes. It reached out a hand and whispered in my own voice, "Welcome back." Suddenly, everything went dark. I woke up in my bed the next morning, drenched in sweat. But something was wrong. My reflection in the mirror stared back at me. Not with my own eyes, but with those same hollow, lifeless ones from the forest. I had never left the temporary sector. 2 stories, the forest sector. I was eager to escape the city's clamor, so I ventured into the forest for a quick getaway. It was late afternoon when I arrived at the edge of the temporary sector. A secluded part of the woods known for its eerie reputation. The sun hung low, casting long shadows as I followed the narrow path into the trees. The air grew cooler and denser as I walked, the once vibrant sounds of the forest now muffled. I kept a brisk pace, not wanting to linger. The temporary sector had an unsettling aura, with its tangled underbrush and twisted trees. The locals spoke of strange occurrences here, but I dismissed them as mere superstitions. My phone's signal had been lost almost immediately, which was both expected and comforting. I preferred the isolation. After a while, I stumbled upon an old, weathered cabin, its wooden walls cracked and overgrown with vines. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached it. The door creaked open with a gentle push. Inside, the cabin was dusty and filled with old, forgotten items. I noticed a peculiar object, a large, ancient-looking clock on a rickety table. It was frozen at 3, which seemed odd for such an isolated place. As I examined the clock, a chill ran down my spine. I heard footsteps behind me, faint but deliberate. My heart pounded as I spun around, but the cabin was empty. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I decided to leave, but the door slammed shut with a loud bang as I reached for it. Panicking, I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The room grew colder, and I noticed a shadow in the corner of the cabin. It moved closer, revealing a figure shrouded in darkness. The figure whispered in a hollow voice, "You shouldn't be here." My blood ran cold. I could barely think, but I remembered the window. I dashed to it, and with all my strength, forced it open. I climbed through and ran back to the path, not daring to look behind. When I finally reached the edge of the forest, I looked back. The cabin was gone, replaced by dense foliage. I was bewildered. Had it ever been there? That night, back in the city, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was a picture of the old clock, and the time on it was now ticking, exactly at 3. I never returned to the temporary sector. The forest had left its mark on me, a chilling reminder of what lies beyond the veil of normalcy. 3 story, The Forest of the Temporary Sector. I had heard the stories about the temporary sector in the forest since I was a kid. Everyone in the small town of Westford had their own version of what was out there, but none of them agreed. Some said it was an old government facility. Others whispered about experiments gone wrong. Despite the warnings, I was curious. So, one weekend, I gathered my courage and decided to check it out. My friend Brian refused to come along, saying he had a bad feeling about it. "It's a cursed place, man," he warned. But I laughed it off and went alone. The forest was thick, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. I followed an overgrown path deeper into the woods, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. No birds chirped, no wind rustled the leaves. It was like the world itself had paused. After what felt like hours, I found it. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded a small area marked by faded signs. "Temporary sector, keep out." I had found it. I climbed the fence easily, landing on the other side with a thud. The buildings looked abandoned, windows shattered, doors hanging off their hinges. As I explored the area, I felt something watching me. I glanced around, but saw nothing. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground, and I realized I needed to leave soon. That's when I heard it. A soft hum almost mechanical, coming from one of the larger buildings. My curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the floor creaked under my feet. In the center of the room was an old machine covered in cables and wires. The hum grew louder the closer I got. Suddenly, a cold gust of air swept through the building, slamming the door shut. The lights flickered on for a brief moment, and I saw them. Shadows moving at the edge of my vision, too fast to track. Panic gripped me as I turned to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. I pounded on it until my hands ached. Then I saw it. A figure standing in the corner of the room, motionless. It was human in shape, but its face was featureless, just a smooth blank mask where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. It tilted its head slowly, as if studying me, and began to move toward me. I backed away, my back hitting the machine. The hum grew deafening, and suddenly the figure vanished. The room was still again, but I knew I wasn't alone. Desperately, I searched for another exit. My hands found a small hatch in the floor, and I pulled it open, crawling into the darkness below. The crawl space was tight, the walls pressing in on me. I could barely breathe. As I dragged myself forward, I heard something following me. Scratching, sounds echoed through the space, growing louder and closer. I moved faster, pushing through the darkness until I finally burst out into the open air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. Breathless and covered in dirt, I sped away from the forest. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the shadowy figure standing at the tree line, watching me leave. I never spoke about that day again. But sometimes at night, I hear that hum and wonder if I ever truly escaped the temporary sector.